This is Curative Design, and I'm Ruin Matthews. One of my favorite documentaries of the past decade is special for a number of reasons. It beautifully tells the story of Ayrton Senna, the dashing, young, incredibly talented racing driver who was tragically cut down in his prime. It highlights Senna's love for his home country, Brazil, and his country's love for him. It weaves in an almost Shakespearean rivalry between his former teammate Alain Prost and himself. It explores his interest in keeping both the other drivers and himself safe on the track. And it was written by a British Indian orthopedic surgeon and directed by another British Indian director with its own fascinating backstory as to how they received permission from the Senna family to proceed with the documentary. I could perhaps talk your ears off about these and all the other things that I found fascinating about both this racing driver and his legacy. However, I wanted to focus in on a particular scene from the documentary and how it relates to something that many of us navigate in our day-to-day lives, the notion of power distance. Simply put, the sense that one has to choose their words carefully when communicating to their managers for fear of some form of retaliation, whether it be perceived, emotional, or actual. And in healthcare, we are learning that this idea of power distance can stifle clear, bidirectional communication and can play a factor in causing serious safety events. Interestingly, the scenes in the documentary that I was hoping to discuss demonstrate Ayrton Senna navigating the politics of Formula One racing to rally for driver safety, which seemed an interesting parallel to the work that I do in healthcare. So if any of that seems intriguing to you, let's go ahead and strap in, turn the ignition, and start our engines. Unlike other documentaries where critical events need to be recreated for the audience, the power of this film comes from the archival footage that the Senna estate themselves relinquished after years of being quite secretive around the disclosure of some of these and other deeply personal records. Part of these archives were the actual discussions between the drivers and the race management prior to each race, unscripted. It is a treasure trove of real-world relationship drama in the high-stakes world of international Formula One racing. While Senna was a gifted driver behind the wheel, the documentary takes time to show how he needed to learn about the politics of Formula One motorsport, making his debut as a driver at the young age of 24. Part of this was the heated rivalry that developed between himself and the French racing driver and, for a short time, teammate Alain Prost. Things came to a head during an infamous crash during the Japanese Grand Prix in 1989 that saw the F1A side with Prost over a controversial decision relating to how Senna returned to the race after the crash. This method of re-entry had been allowed in previous races and suggested that the commissioner of the F1A, who had been close to Prost, simply sided with him, suspending Senna from further competition and allowing Prost to be crowned champion for that year. Returning from his suspension, Senna not only appeared wizened and ready to navigate the complex racing lines of the various tracks of the Formula One Grand Prix, but also better able to manage the complex web of power and politics within the motorsport. McRae and Auerbach describe the term of power distance to be the relationship between those in power and their subordinates in an organizational structure. Wherever there are organizational structures, there are power distances. Studies have shown that low power distance cultures tend to encourage members of the team, regardless of role or responsibility, to speak up and share concerns. High power distance cultures tend to be more autocratic, giving directives versus consulting their subordinates for consensus-based decision-making. Despite winning the Japanese Grand Prix, Senna was stripped of the title and suspended from racing based on an ambiguous decision of a rule by those in power, namely the F1A commissioner. This appeared to be Senna's first foray into understanding who held the power in the world of Formula One. Archival footage from a drivers' meeting the following year saw Senna taking a different tack. Instead of overt hostility, he appeared to demonstrate passive aggression, walking out of a drivers' meeting when it was decided that for the race, the rule that Senna had supposedly violated would no longer be enforced due to safety concerns. While Senna does make a point, the remainder of the driver's safety briefing occurs without his valuable input as a result of his walking out. I suspect what Senna realized was that the voice of multiple drivers raising a safety concern was powerful and couldn't be ignored by the management, bringing us to the 1991 Formula One season. It had been another tremendous season for Senna, having won 7 races and scoring numerous pole positions. Then, during the Mexican Grand Prix in June of that year, a mechanical failure resulted in a high-speed collision. He sustained minor head injuries, but was clearly shaken from the event. On a side note, the F1 track doctor, Professor Sid Watkins, was close personal friends with Senna and can be seen in the documentary reassuring the media that Senna was fit to race. Professor Watkins was a towering figure in the field of motorsport safety, particularly F1 safety, and may very well be the subject of another Curative Design essay in the future. Which brings us to the scene that I wanted to discuss. Here, Senna raises the concern that he has for the safety of the drivers, sharing his own recent experience with a high-speed crash. Specifically, the use of tires at the escapement area, which he believed to be more dangerous than cones because of their propensity to flip Formula One cars plowing into them. The F1A commissioner and another member of the leadership team appear initially interested in what Ayrton has to say, but then take the tack of falling back to a particular regulation as to why Senna's suggestion cannot be realized. Ayrton, ready for this, expertly rebuts with the exact wording of the regulation that in fact allows his request to remove the tires from a safety standpoint. The commissioner concedes the point, but immediately makes a power play, stating that the best decision for the drivers is his decision. This is a high power distance maneuver. In the murmuring from the drivers, it seems clear that Ayrton is on the right side of the argument here, arguing for a stance that could affect all the drivers' safety. The commissioner attempts to save face by countering that his decision is a vote by the drivers, which of course allows the drivers to vote unanimously in support of Ayrton's request to replace the tires in the escapement area with cones. Almost poetically, 3 hours later, Ayrton's very own rival plowed into said cones safely and without incident. I use the term rival loosely because Alain Prost went on to be a big booster of Senna's foundation in later years following Senna's death. My favorite part of this scene is the big grin on Senna's face at the end of the exchange. He had raised his point, successfully navigated the high power distance culture established by the then F1 commissioner, and helped implement a safety change that may have saved the life of a fellow driver. As is often the case with young people cut down in the pinnacle of their careers, the myth surrounding their accomplishments tend to grow over time. And yet, 30 plus years after his tragic passing at the Imola Grand Prix, which I won't go into as I really do want you to try and watch the documentary, so many of our great racing drivers in the sport still refer to him as one of the greatest drivers that had ever lived. Charismatic, handsome, passionate, and just a technically brilliant racer. I suppose I'm drawn to both his legacy on the track as well as his commitment to the progression of the sport and life safety of his fellow drivers. After his death, his close friend, Professor Sid Watkins, went on to help institute a number of changes, including improvements to crash barriers, track redesign, and major cuts to engine power. Senna was also a known humanitarian, dedicating a significant portion of his time to support the welfare of various social causes in his home country of Brazil. In fact, 2 months before his passing, Ayrton and his sister Vivian discussed creating a charity that would support the educational and developmental needs of children throughout Brazil. Since 1995, the organization Instituto Ayrton Senna has educated over 12 million underprivileged children. So, in many ways, the Senna legacy lives on, both in motorsport, charitable deeds, and for myself in the space of navigating the team dynamics of power, distance, and safety. This is Curative Design, and I'm Arun Matthews.